He slept in abandoned construction sites for 2 years, eating from dumpsters behind restaurants. Today, he owns a multi-million-dollar cleaning company and employs over 200 people. This is the story of Alejandro Rivera. Alejandro Rivera had it all figured out at 28. Head chef at one of Portland's most prestigious restaurants, pulling in 6 figures. Living in a downtown loft with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city he thought he owned. Every night, he'd come home exhausted, but satisfied, believing his culinary skills were his ticket to permanent success. The restaurant was booming. His signature dishes were getting written up in food magazines, and he was already planning to open his own place within 2 years. But success in the restaurant industry is fragile, and Alejandro was about to learn that the hard way. The first crack appeared when his mother called from El Salvador. His father had suffered a massive stroke and needed immediate surgery that would cost everything his family had saved, plus more. Without hesitation, Alejandro emptied his savings account, liquidated his investments, and sent every penny south. It felt like the right thing to do, the only thing to do. Family came first, always. 2 months later, while he was still sending monthly payments to cover his father's ongoing medical care, the restaurant industry got hit by a perfect storm. Rising food costs, labor shortages, and changing customer preferences created a crisis that smaller establishments couldn't survive. Alejandro watched helplessly as the restaurant's revenue dropped month after month. The owners, facing bankruptcy themselves, had no choice but to make devastating cuts. As one of the highest-paid employees, Alejandro was among the first to go. The unemployment hit him like a physical blow. For the first time in his adult life, he had no income and no savings to fall back on. Pride kept him from telling his family about his situation while they were dealing with his father's recovery. He spent his days applying for chef positions, but the market was oversaturated with talented professionals just like him, all competing for the few available spots. Weeks turned into months, and his unemployment benefits barely covered his rent, let alone food and utilities. By month 4, Alejandro was behind on everything. His landlord, initially understanding, grew impatient as the debt mounted. The electricity got cut off first, then the water. Alejandro found himself showering at the gym until his membership expired, and he couldn't afford to renew it. He was living on instant noodles and whatever free samples he could find at grocery stores. Too proud to visit food banks, but too desperate to maintain his standards. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning in November. Alejandro sat in his empty apartment, surrounded by boxes of belongings he had nowhere to take, staring at the official document that gave him 72 hours to vacate. His phone had been disconnected weeks earlier, so he couldn't even call friends to ask for help. The few chef colleagues he'd stayed in touch with were struggling themselves, and his pride wouldn't let him burden them anyway. The night before he had to leave, Alejandro walked through his neighborhood one last time. These streets where he'd once felt so confident, so established, now felt foreign and hostile. Tomorrow, he would officially join the ranks of Portland's homeless population, a reality that seemed impossible just months earlier. As he packed his most essential belongings into 2 garbage bags and a worn backpack, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was temporary. It had to be temporary. But as winter settled over Portland, bringing with it the cold rain and harsh winds that would define the next 2 years of his life, Alejandro began to understand that temporary can stretch longer than anyone ever imagines. The man who once crafted elegant meals for Portland's elite was about to learn what it meant to survive on the streets, one day at a time. Living on the streets taught Alejandro lessons no culinary school ever could. The first weeks were the hardest, not just physically, but mentally. Every morning, he'd wake up in doorways or under bridges, his body aching from sleeping on concrete, his mind struggling to accept this new reality. The smell of restaurant kitchens would drift through the air, and instead of bringing comfort, they reminded him of everything he'd lost. He'd catch glimpses of his reflection in storefront windows and barely recognize the man staring back. The homeless community in Portland became his unexpected teachers. There was Elena, a former nurse who'd lost everything to medical bills after a cancer diagnosis. She showed him which shelters were safe, which areas to avoid at night, and how to stay warm using cardboard and newspaper. There was old Pete, a Vietnam veteran who taught him where to find day labor work and which restaurants threw away food that was still good to eat. These weren't the broken, hopeless people Alejandro had imagined. They were survivors with stories, dignity, and wisdom earned through struggle. Winter nights were brutal. Portland's rain seemed endless, soaking through every layer of clothing he owned. Alejandro would huddle in abandoned construction sites, learning to judge which buildings offered the best shelter from wind and rain. Some nights, he'd find spots near restaurant exhaust vents where warm air would provide a few hours of relief. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. He watched other homeless individuals get sick, disappear, or give up entirely. Staying alive became a full-time job that required constant vigilance and creativity. But it was during these darkest moments that Alejandro began to notice something others missed. While searching for warm places to sleep, he discovered that many of Portland's office buildings were filthy. Not just messy, but genuinely neglected. Bathrooms with broken fixtures, carpets stained and worn, windows so dirty they barely let light through. As someone who'd worked in kitchens where cleanliness was everything, the contrast was striking. These buildings housed successful businesses, yet their basic maintenance was obviously inadequate. One particularly cold February morning, while seeking shelter in an office building's parking garage, Alejandro overheard a heated conversation between two business owners. They were complaining about their cleaning service, how unreliable they were, how expensive it was getting, and how they couldn't find anyone who really cared about doing quality work. One of them mentioned paying almost $3,000 monthly for cleaning that wasn't even satisfactory. That number hit Alejandro like lightning. $3,000. He'd been sleeping outside for months, scraping together maybe $20 on good days from odd jobs and spare change. Yet here were businesses throwing thousands at a problem they couldn't solve properly. The irony wasn't lost on him. He understood attention to detail. He knew what real cleanliness looked like, and he was hungry enough to work harder than anyone they'd ever hired. That night, huddled in his usual spot near the abandoned construction site, Alejandro couldn't stop thinking about what he'd heard. For the first time in months, something other than survival occupied his mind. He started paying attention differently, noticing how many office buildings, restaurants, and small businesses seemed to struggle with the same issue. The more he observed, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just a Portland problem. This was an opportunity hiding in plain sight. The idea started small, almost laughably so. What if he could offer something different? What if someone who truly understood standards, who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove, could build something real from this basic need? It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was everywhere. Every building needed cleaning, and most were paying for results they weren't getting. Alejandro's transformation didn't happen overnight. The idea of starting a cleaning business while homeless seemed impossible to everyone, including himself some days. But desperation has a way of making impossible things feel necessary. He started by doing what he could with what he had, which was essentially nothing except his determination and the standards he'd learned in professional kitchens. His first office was a corner table at the central library, where he could use free internet and stay warm for hours. Alejandro taught himself everything about the commercial cleaning industry, reading articles about contracts, insurance requirements, and pricing strategies. He learned about different types of cleaning equipment, chemicals, and scheduling systems. Most importantly, he studied his potential competitors, discovering that many cleaning companies were indeed struggling with quality control and employee retention. The learning process was humbling. Alejandro had to admit he knew nothing about running a business, filing taxes, or managing employees. But his years as a head chef had taught him about standards, efficiency, and managing teams under pressure. Those skills, he realized, could translate to any service industry. The difference would be in execution and reliability, two things he was prepared to stake everything on. Getting the necessary business license and insurance seemed impossible without a permanent address or credit history. Alejandro spent weeks figuring out how to navigate these requirements. He used the shelter's address for official documents and found a small community bank willing to work with someone in his situation. The loan officer, Maria Santos, later told him she'd never seen someone so prepared, yet so obviously struggling. His detailed business plan, written on library computers and printed on borrowed money, convinced her to take a chance. The first real breakthrough came when Alejandro approached a small accounting firm whose windows hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Instead of making a sales pitch, he simply asked if he could clean one window for free to demonstrate his work. The owner, curious about this articulate homeless man, with calloused hands and determined eyes, agreed. Alejandro spent 2 hours on that single window, using techniques he'd learned from research and applying the same attention to detail he'd once reserved for plating gourmet meals. When he finished, the window was spotless, the frame was polished, and even the surrounding area looked better than it had in years. The owner was impressed enough to let Alejandro clean the entire storefront. When that was completed to the same standard, she offered him a monthly contract worth $400. It wasn't much, but it was legitimacy. It was proof that his idea could work. Word spread slowly but steadily through Portland's small business community. Alejandro's approach was different from other cleaning services. He showed up on time, every time. He paid attention to details others missed. He treated every space like it mattered, because to him, it did. Each contract was a step away from the streets and towards something bigger. Within 6 months, Alejandro had 8 regular clients and was earning enough to rent a small studio apartment. The first night he slept in his own bed. After 2 years on the streets, he couldn't sleep. The silence felt foreign after months of city noise, sirens, and the constant vigilance required for street survival. But more than relief, he felt purpose. This wasn't just about getting back to where he'd been. This was about building something entirely new. The real breakthrough came when Alejandro discovered what separated successful cleaning companies from mediocre ones. It wasn't just about scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. The companies making serious money understood that modern businesses needed comprehensive facility management, not just basic cleaning. This revelation changed everything about how he approached his growing operation. The idea crystallized during a conversation with Rebecca Chen, owner of a tech startup that had become one of his best clients. She mentioned paying separate companies for cleaning, window washing, carpet care, minor maintenance, and supply management. The coordination headaches and inconsistent quality were costing her more than money. They were costing productivity and stress. When she asked if Alejandro could handle just one additional service, he realized she was describing a massive market opportunity that most cleaning companies completely missed. Instead of expanding randomly, Alejandro made a strategic decision that would define his success. He identified the 5 services that every business needed, but hated managing separately: comprehensive cleaning, window and exterior maintenance, floor care and restoration, basic facility repairs, and supply management with inventory tracking. Rather than trying to master all of these immediately, he developed a systematic approach to building expertise in each area while maintaining his reputation for reliability. His daily routine became obsessively structured. Alejandro would start each morning at 4:30, reviewing the day's scheduled services and checking that all equipment was properly maintained and stocked. By 5:15, he was en route to his first location, usually arriving 30 minutes before business hours began. This early arrival wasn't just about convenience. It allowed him to work without disrupting business operations and gave him time to handle unexpected issues without running behind schedule. The learning process was intensive but methodical. Alejandro enrolled in weekend certification courses for carpet cleaning, floor restoration, and basic electrical work. He studied supply chain management through online courses and learned inventory tracking systems. Most importantly, he documented every process he developed, creating detailed protocols that would later allow him to train employees who could maintain his standards even when he wasn't present. The first major breakthrough came 18 months after starting the business. Rebecca's tech company was expanding rapidly and needed facility management for their new 40,000 square foot headquarters. Instead of just bidding on cleaning services, Alejandro proposed a comprehensive facility management contract that would handle everything from daily cleaning to quarterly deep maintenance. His proposal included detailed protocols, regular quality assessments, and a pricing structure that actually saved them money compared to managing multiple vendors. When Rebecca's company awarded him the contract worth $18,000 monthly, Alejandro faced his first real scaling challenge. He needed to hire and train employees who could maintain his standards while he managed operations and pursued additional large contracts. The homeless community that had once been his support system became his first hiring pool. He knew these individuals understood hard work, attention to detail, and the value of stable employment. Training his first employees required adapting everything he'd learned about kitchen management to facility services. Alejandro developed comprehensive training programs that covered not just cleaning techniques, but professional communication, time management, and quality control. He instituted daily briefings, weekly performance reviews, and monthly team meetings where employees could suggest improvements to existing processes. The scaling strategy that ultimately made the business enormously successful was Alejandro's focus on long-term contracts with growth-oriented companies. Instead of chasing numerous small clients, he targeted businesses that were expanding, relocating, or upgrading their facilities. These companies needed partners who could grow with them, not just vendors who provided basic services. 5 years after sleeping in abandoned construction sites, Alejandro Rivera walks through the headquarters of Rivera Facility Solutions, a company that now employs over 200 people across 3 states. The transformation is remarkable, not just in scale, but in purpose. What started as survival has evolved into something much deeper. A business built on the principle that everyone deserves dignity through meaningful work. The numbers tell part of the story. Rivera Facility Solutions generates over $12 million annually, managing comprehensive facility services for everything from tech startups to major medical centers. They've won state awards for business excellence and been recognized nationally for their employee development programs. But Alejandro measures success differently now. He counts it in the stories of employees who've moved from homelessness to home ownership, from addiction recovery to team leadership, from desperation to dignity. Walking through the company's training facility, Alejandro stops to watch new employees practice carpet restoration techniques. Many of these trainees came from backgrounds similar to his own. People who'd lost everything and needed not just jobs, but genuine opportunities to rebuild their lives. The 6-week certification program he developed doesn't just teach technical skills. It addresses personal development, financial planning, and career advancement within the company. Most businesses hire people and hope they work out. Alejandro explains to visitors touring the facility, "We invest in people and help them work out. The difference is everything." This philosophy emerged from his own experience of being overlooked, underestimated, and written off by society. He understood that technical skills could be taught, but character, determination, and loyalty couldn't be bought. They had to be recognized and cultivated. The company's employee advancement program reflects this understanding. Rivera Facility Solutions promotes from within whenever possible, provides continuing education support, and offers profit sharing that makes long-term employees genuine stakeholders in the company's success. Alejandro created pathways for advancement that don't require college degrees, but do demand excellent performance, leadership potential, and commitment to the company's values. 3 times a week, Alejandro visits local shelters and recovery programs, not to recruit employees, but to share his story and demonstrate that transformation is possible. These speaking engagements aren't marketing for his business. They're investments in hope. He tells audiences that homelessness doesn't define character, that past mistakes don't determine future potential, and that society benefits when everyone has opportunities to contribute meaningfully. The personal transformation runs deeper than professional success. Alejandro lives modestly despite his wealth, maintaining close relationships with people from every chapter of his journey. Elena, the former nurse who taught him street survival, now manages one of his regional offices. Old Pete, the Vietnam veteran who showed him where to find day labor, works part-time as a mentor in the employee development program. These relationships remind Alejandro daily that success means lifting others as you climb. His father, whose medical crisis inadvertently triggered Alejandro's downfall, recovered fully and now lives comfortably thanks to his son's success. But their relationship has evolved beyond financial support. Alejandro credits those difficult years with teaching him resilience, empathy, and the understanding that real strength comes from helping others succeed. His father often says that watching his son rebuild from nothing taught him more about perseverance than a lifetime of steady employment ever could. The future plans for Rivera Facility Solutions focus on expansion, but not just geographic growth. Alejandro is developing partnerships with social service organizations to create pipelines from homelessness and recovery programs into stable employment. He's also working on a foundation that will provide microloans and mentorship for people starting service-based businesses, particularly those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. Looking back on those 2 years sleeping in abandoned buildings, Alejandro doesn't romanticize the suffering. Homelessness was devastating, dangerous, and dehumanizing. But it was also educational in ways that business school never could have been. It taught him to see opportunities others missed, to value every customer and employee, and to never take stability for granted. Most importantly, it showed him that rock bottom can become a solid foundation if you're willing to build carefully and persistently. End of the story. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories of overcoming, and leave your comment below. Your message might brighten someone's day. See you in the next video.